spool out to all streams, but as we spool up here, welcome everybody. Here you go. Another live episode of This Week in Drones. Hope you're all doing well. We're here with Greg Reverdiau, and he is the co-founder of the Pilot Institute. Super excited to have him on. We'll get into his background, and we're going to dive into the BVLOS NPRM today, part 108, from that individual operator, part 107 pilot perspective that he represents. Very excited to do that. Of course, joined by the great Michelle Duquette, who is a strategist in the drone and AAM interoperability world. And then Matt Sloane was not able to make it this morning, but hopefully on the next round, we'll hear from him as well. Another great friend. With that said, I would like to just take a minute. I saw this come through my feed from Liberty University today, and it says, "The land of the free because of the brave. Today we honor those who were lost and the lives that were affected by the tragic events that occurred on September 11th, 2001. And of course, today is September 11th. So wanted to take a moment on the podcast to remember this. May we never forget. So thank you so much. And last but not least, before we dive in, I just want to thank our flight crew members today, Andrew Bowen and Michelle Duquette. Really appreciate you guys. And Andrew is a civilian contractor, field engineer, UAV pilot, doing a ton of work in California with all the big, events that are spooling up there over the next couple of years here. And Michelle, of course, enterprise strategist for drone and AM operability. Thank you guys so much for your partnership making this podcast, this episode possible. So with that said, we are going to jump over and Greg, I would just love for you to introduce yourself to our audience. A lot of times we've invited on folks that are representing enterprises that use drones, whether it's electric utilities using drones for inspections or law enforcement agencies, deploying drones for 911 dispatch, on and on from there, and just supporting that whole world. But you represent, I believe you told me about 450,000 trained Part 107 pilots and pilot standard aviation pilot licenses, and you've trained about a quarter of the Part 107 certified pilots in existence, or in the U.S. or globally. I don't know. You tell me.
In the U.S., yeah.
And then meanwhile, we have this NPRM, this notice of proposed rulemaking, that we still have a window of time to make comments. And I've realized that at least 90% or more of the drone pilots, in existence today are individual operators who, that's just a massive representation of who's out there using drones. 90% of them who are going to be impacted by the way that this ruling gets finalized. So I wanted to invite you to bring a perspective to our audience today, just from that Part 107, community that you represent. And just last thing I'll say, and I'll pass it to you. And then Michelle, of course, I'll let you do an intro here in a minute as well. But guys, we are live again, so please send in comments while we're live. Gets things, keeps us on our toes, makes it fun. And I'm sure Greg would love to answer questions on the fly that we didn't prepare for. So please send them in, because now is the time really to have open, honest, genuine, back and forth conversations and debates while the window is still open. So with that said, even if you're out there listening live now, feel free to just say hi so we know who's out there, and I'll shout you out as you type in. But with that said, Greg, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about the drone or the Pilot Institute, that is, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. There's obviously been a lot of discussions about Part 108, and the window to comment is getting narrower and narrower every day. So it's good to have these discussions. But yeah, a little bit more about myself and Pilot Institute. We've trained a lot of folks, like you said. We specialize in drone training, but also airplane training, because this is actually my background. I'm a flight instructor. I'm a commercial pilot, and I've been in aviation education my whole adult life, pretty much. I went to a school in Florida, the Florida Institute of Technology. I worked there for 13 years, managed there.
Oh.
Did you lose me? Okay.
I did.
Sorry about that.
Okay,
it happens every once in a while, yeah. And then ended up moving to Arizona, where I live now, managing a smaller flight school. But then I quickly realized that pilots in general, and so decided to start Pilot Institute. And yeah, we've been doing this for almost 8 years now online, and we've trained, like you said, the folks that we represent are the folks that fly drones, whether they're the individual owner of a business that has a drone, they're part of a larger crew that flies for Fortune 500, or also folks that fly for public safety agencies. We've got a little over 1,000 public safety agencies that we've trained over the years. And so it's important for us to hear what is going on in the industry and how people are perceiving this and how they actually want to fly beyond visual line of sight, which I think is the key, right? We need to listen to how people want to fly their drones beyond visual line of sight, and then we need to help the FAA codify all of this into something that's meaningful. So yeah, that's my quick intro.
Wonderful. Awesome. And good to see you guys out there, Aaron Nelson and Michael, and of course, Andrew Bowen, one of the flight crew members. How's everybody doing? Thanks for sending notes in. Don't forget to ask some questions to this panel as we go through this. With that, Michelle, do you mind, share, obviously a lot of folks know who you are, but feel free to share a bit about who you are, what you do. And I'd like to hear just your take as you've been listening and hearing and dialoguing with many different stakeholder groups over the last month, and I'm sure much earlier than that, on this part, on Part 108. I just like to hear kind of like, where are you at? Where's your head at right now? With everything that you're hearing.
Sure. So, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us again this week. This is an important conversation, and one that I've been involved in, like in different pockets for the since the NPRM came out, and it's fascinating. So I initially came from legacy aviation. I was an aircraft dispatcher. So as many of you have heard me say a number of times, my brain is wired operationally. And then having spent the last 24 years with the FAA's think tank, the MITRE Corporation, where I worked very, very closely kind of on the inside with the FAA, it gave me a much, much better appreciation for this system of systems that we were called an NAS, right? And the infrastructure, as well as the policy and procedures, and why things kind of roll out the way they roll out. So when the NPRM came out, obviously there were many, many, many different perspectives on the efficacy of the language. I mean, in reality, we all know that the language has been in progress for the last few years. And we've had some administration changes that, we've had to kind of go back and revisit some of the language and tailor it, et cetera. And in the meantime, we're still talking about the drone industry, and the drone industry does not wait for anything. And so the technology has continued to evolve. The services that we're able to provide has continued to evolve since all of this was started. Where my head is at right now is there are some very good things in this language. I love that we're shifting to more of a performance-based perspective. That makes me happy. I am hearing a lot of kudos for the agency actually taking that positioning. I think it's wonderful. I'm also hearing some challenges, some deeply rooted concerns, in fact, in some areas, some of which I share. Having been a 121 aircraft dispatcher, I'm having a hard time with a couple of the approaches within the NPRM, but I don't think any of it is insurmountable. So I think conversations like these are exactly what we need to be having right now while the comment period is open. And all of the perspectives, I think, are valuable. There may be some that are a little more forward thinking than perhaps we as an industry can handle. And I don't mean industry, I mean industry and government and the current state of the NAS and the current state of the budgets and all of those things considered. However, painting that North Star and getting as clear as we can, I think we absolutely can be doing something there.
Beautiful. Well, Greg, why don't we just dive into what you're hearing? What has been the response from if you can hear me. I know you're bouncing in and out there. Hopefully you can hear me okay. But
Yeah.
what has been the response to this NPRM as a whole from the 90% represented of drone operators, of the Part 107 license holders, as they look at the potential Part 108 coming out? Do you have any just like initial feedback as you guys have been reading through this? I know you've created a strategy that you can get into as well, but we'd love to just like hear, what's been your take and how have you navigated so far?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that we've heard, and hopefully when my screen goes black, you can still hear me. Is it cutting off my audio when the screen goes black?
I'm not. Is it? Okay.
Well, it is. Okay. If anything, I'll switch cameras if we need to. But anyways, the biggest thing that we've seen missing is folks are worried about the ability to have a waiver to fly beyond visual line of sight under Part 107. So as it is proposed right now under Part 108, it's a fully autonomous proposal. There's no pilot in the loop. This is a term that the FAA uses in the document. There's no pilot in the loop involved at all. And a lot of folks are still going to be operating by flying the drone manually with a controller, and that's not something that is being brought up in this document at all. So we call it the gap internally when we've been doing all these discussions. We call it the gap. There's a gap between VLOS Part 107 operations and fully autonomous Part 108 missions as it is proposed right now. There's a gap for low risk, non-autonomous beyond visual line of sight operations. That's really the best way to look at it. And these things are things that we're doing right now with waivers. These are folks that are doing power line inspections beyond visual line of sight safely within a certain distance, but they're doing it manually. They're using a flight control. There's a human in the loop. And I think we're missing that portion, which is what, all of the folks that I represent, that we train, that's what they want to do at the moment. And I want to make clear that the proposal from the FAA is very futuristic, actually, which is not a word that we hear from the FAA very often, but it's actually very futuristic, which is good. It's good to create regulation that is going to live for the next 10, 15, 20 years and be able to be, modeled a little bit and massaged. But I think they're missing today. They're missing the present, which is the way that we operate today under waivers. That's the biggest gripes that I've heard from that side. I've talked to the man aircraft side as well a lot, because this is also a place where we operate a lot. And I think the 91-113 right of wave rules is the biggest topic of discussion on that side of the industry. So, yep.
Wow. Yep. So being able, the gap in 108 is that you have to jump automatically to fully autonomous flights versus being able to have a pilot in the loop. And a vast majority of pilots today are flying one-to-one with their own drone without having a fully automated system at play, for sure, right? And so what happens to that group of, millions really of people? Do they still have a way to, is there like some way to close that gap with language? That's a great point. So Michelle, any thoughts that you have? I just recalled that earlier you were talking a little bit about how even including the ability to have waivers as opposed to trying to get it 100% perfect the first time. I thought that was kind of interesting, but what was your thought on that again?
So I've heard many people, and I get irritated when people talk in generalities like that. I have been on panels and I have been listening to panels and listening to podcasts where I'm hearing, we want 108 so that we don't have to do waivers anymore. And if you take that literally, that will never happen. And I don't think it's their intent for it to be taken literally. They want to do what they've been doing under the waivers as normal operations. And I think it's important for people to recognize that that is the intent of the FAA's process, right? They put a law out there, and they're normalizing what is not currently capable or possible underneath current law. But then they allow for these exceptions, and it comes in a waiver form or an exemption form. And those exceptions allow you to pressure test the boundaries of the existing regulation. And in doing that pressure testing, as you're pushing the envelope, you're collecting data, And what you're doing is, as you share that back with the FAA, I know sometimes that's a big pain, but there's a method to their madness. They collect all of that data, they collect that intelligence, and they use that to refine what that next rule needs to be.
Mhm.
So even though it's a bit of a pain to fill out these exceptions, these waiver forms, which in some cases they've been streamlined quite a lot. So it's not as big of a burden as it once used to be. But as you are doing that and then you're sharing that information back with the FAA, you are influencing what that next rule will come out to look like.
Yep.
So as we evolve into Part 108, there is a value, a big value in continuing to push the envelope in a deliberate way and doing that through these exception processes, the waivers or the exemptions, so that we continue to learn what it is that industry wants to do. I mean, not everybody is going to push the boundaries in the same way. So we want all of those perspectives to come in so that the FAA has a good, solid understanding of what they need to be prepared for that's coming next. So waivers are never going to go away, in my opinion. I think we will always have waivers. I think it's a great way for the agency to learn at an enterprise level, and it's also a great way for the industry to figure out how to influence what the future world is going to look like.
Well,
Yep.
that's
I
brilliant.
agree.
Oh, and yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Oh,
I wanted you
I
to
was
springboard into
yeah.
some of your comments earlier about how you're using your previous waivers to influence now your comments on this proposed rulemaking, right? I was just going to tie back to that. Go ahead.
Yep, absolutely. No, I agree with Michelle. This is and quite frankly, I think the proposal right now for Part 108 doesn't have enough mentions of waivable items, which I think we probably need to add. But yes, look at the FAA and look at what happened with operations over people. It used to be 100% a waiver process. Operations at night used to be 100% a waiver process under Part 107, and then the FAA learned, and then they codified the stuff in 2021. And so we need to do the same thing. We've collected waivers for 107.31 beyond visual line of sight for a long time. And then now let's use what we've learned to codify this into low risk, non-autonomous BVLOS operations. And that's the key to me. But yes, and then they did the same thing with Section 333. If you remember back in the days when before we had Part 107, there was Section 333. And when you look at what Section 333 was, by the way, it's very much a waiver process. They were asking, what our area of operation are you going to do? What kind of aircraft are you going to fly? What kind of training are you going to provide the pilot? And what kind of airspace are you going to fly in? So all of these things are have followed us all these years. Part 107 is almost a decade old. Next year, it will be a decade old in 2026.
And just so that we're all on the same page here, this is nothing new just for drones. The
Nope.
waiver process, the exemption process has been a deliberate part of how the FAA learns by doing for decades in legacy
Yep.
aviation. We are just leveraging that learning process. So it's not unique to drones, and it's not like the FAA doesn't know what they're doing, folks. They absolutely know. This is a very deliberate learning process, and that deliberate learning process, as they ingest that intelligence, they have an intake for their airspace safety cases. They have an intake for pilot certification, that for aircraft certification, for all of the different facets that make this ecosystem safe and effective.
Mhm.
Interesting. Greg, you were talking earlier about, was it like 16 points or something, that you guys are submitting in your comments, and it's based
16
pages, that is,
Yes.
as an insert, as a recommended subsection to Part 108, that includes representation, as we've been discussing, for Part 107 pilots, with the pilot in the loop as part of that, right?
Yep.
And you said that a lot of that was based on the history of different waivers and things that you've seen approved over the years that have started to become more codified, if you will, and weren't necessarily represented, or you didn't see represented in this draft, right? I mean, do you have any
Yep.
other insights into what that entails in those 16 pages? Can you take us into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll give you the quick synopsis. I think it's actually very logical. Let's put it this way: we have a framework right now, which is Part 107, where obviously, the FAA went away from Part 107 and Part 108 because there's no pilot, right? There's no pilot in the loop, which is clear, which is fine for the type of operation. But if we're trying to propose low risk, non-autonomous BVLOS missions, it has to be based on a pilot, a remote pilot in command. So we are using Part 107 as a basis for this, as a base certificate. You get certified under Part 107, and then you're going to get a rating. Michelle, you're going to appreciate that, because what have we been doing in traditional aviation forever? We've been adding ratings to pilot certificates, an instrument rating, a multi-engine rating, a type rating for a different type of drone. So we're proposing a beyond visual line of sight Part 108 rating, which would be added to a Part 107 pilot certificate. And it's very simple. It's another test. Let's make it 40 questions instead of 60, because there's not as much knowledge as the original Part 107 topics. And you go take your test at a PSI testing center, and you get this added into your pilot certificate. You get a new rating line in the back of your remote pilot certificate, and now you can fly beyond visual line of sight. And the beauty of this proposal, and obviously there are some additional details in here, but the beauty of this proposal is that if the FAA goes live with final ruling tomorrow, or in 8 months or 12 months, whatever, the final thing is going to be, we can make that happen tomorrow. There is no additional framework required. We would be using the same drones that we have been using. There is no conformance monitoring required. There is no requirement for airworthiness acceptance, because these drones are already flying under waivers, right? We've learned from waivers. Let's move this. We've done BVLOS operations with a Part 107 pilot, and going forward we can do this, but streamlining it so that, going back to what Michelle said, we can have fewer waivers. We're not getting rid of the waiver process fully, but we can have fewer waivers, and we know what works and what doesn't. And so we've identified 3 different types of operations that could be done under this. These are EVLOS is the first one, extended visual line of sight, because we don't need to go forever, right? The average person that I represent, when I ask around and I said, hey, if you could fly beyond visual line of sight, how far would you want to go? And they say, 1 mile, Make sure I can come back. Oh, there you go. I'll make sure I can come back.
1 mile, 2 miles. Keep going.
1 mile, 2 miles, right? 1 mile, 2 mile is really as far as people want to go, because at the moment, this is really all that they need, because that's also the limit of how comfortable the pilot is going to be with still being in charge of the flight. So how do we get there? EVLOS, extended visual line of sight, 2 miles maximum, and you can use visual observers, because guess what? We've used visual observers forever. Why not put visual observers in strategic positions? They're on the radio with someone, with the pilot in command, and we put them, maybe even daisy chain them up to 2 miles, because we're not allowed to do that in Part 107. But why not? If we train them properly, we can use that. You don't want to use visual observers? Maybe you have access to ground-based DAA, detect and avoid. Okay, use that. In which case, then you have the equipment, and you can be limited to the distance that the detect and avoid equipment is limited to. So if the manufacturer says you can go up to 3 miles, then why not go to 3 miles? So those are the EVLOS thing. That's very simple. We have a way to make this happen today. That's the first type of operation. The second type of operation is agricultural operations, because these, surprisingly, this may be a shock to some people, but they're some of the lowest risk.
It's like a cliffhanger, isn't it?
There you go. I'm back. I'm stopping every time I see it drop. They're the lowest risk level of operation that we can have with a drone. Why? Because they fly over sparsely populated area, typically away from population centers. And not only that, they fly at very low altitude. Right now, 50 feet.
Oh, lost you, Greg.
I'm gonna change to this camera.
No worries.
It's not gonna look as pretty, but
hey, that looks great. That looks great. I would like to know. I don't want to interrupt your train of thought. And you have I think a third one coming up, but I'd like to know on the agriculture one what you guys think about the risk of other crop dusters, coming through, especially if that's really prevalent in this certain area where they're probably going to use drones in lieu of crop dusters, but maybe their neighbors are still using crop dusters. How do you deconflict those? What are your thoughts there? Or, just seeing that in.
We thought about that. Every operation that I mentioned would be required to have ADSB in as a requirement because, and it's either on the drone itself or it's actually with a ground station that you can buy. And these exist. Avionics has devices that can do that. So you can receive the signal from these crop dusters. Now, I know crop dusters don't always broadcast ADSB. That's why we're asking the FAA to make these EC, electronic conspicuity devices, more prevalent so that everybody can be equipped with a portable, something that doesn't work on an electrical system. We want to make sure that everybody in the airspace, and this is crop dusters, balloon operators, gliders, paramotors, skydivers, anybody who's going to be in the airspace not visible, should have the ability to do it for a few $100s. And that's the one thing that we're pushing in our proposal. Michelle, I don't know if you want to butt in on that.
I think that you are hitting what we all, this narrative that you are hitting on is something we need to bring to the forefront. We often hear ADSB is the solution, ADSB this, ADSB that, and then we also hear the other side of that argument, which is, wow, we can't overwhelm the system. We don't need all of that. So electronic conspicuity, while difficult to say, is probably what's going to unlock this whole thing going forward. I think bottom line is we just want to know who's out there, and we want to be able to do the right thing to avoid anything bad happening. So we don't necessarily need to have very specific technology as much as we just need to have that intel that comes from whatever these capabilities are that allow us to see what's out there. And I use see in kind of like air quotes. We need a knowledge of what is operating in the same airspace.
Right. And I'll just by the way, I'm sorry, just a quick comment. Andrew Bowen said TAC.gov, obviously a big
TAC is the way, Andrew.
Big man on TAC, and thanks, Andrew. Again, one of our flight crew members here at the podcast. But, I was curious on that note, what about a combination, sort of a bridge, the gap between full electronic conspicuity, which is maybe futuristic and we'll get there, and what we have now, which could include ground-based DAA sensors and all sorts of sensors. It could be a remote ID, ADSB, radar, acoustic, you name it, all going into, say, TAC or some UTM, maybe it's resilience or one of our friends, and all coming together to provide that airspace awareness picture. So you do have conspicuity with a layered approach, at least as a midterm concept.
I'd open that definition up to include all the things. I mean, it doesn't need to be like EC. Is so much easier to say than electronic conspicuity. EC of the future can be all those things.
The way this is how we walk before we run. The proposal right now from the FAA to be fully autonomous everywhere for all BVLOS operations I don't think is realistic for where we are in the technology. But using what we're proposing, having these low risk, low altitude type of operations, we can try to integrate all these systems and test. This can be a beautiful test bed, real life test bed, and into UTM or whatever we want to call it, a way to have all of the traffic into one location and we can share with everybody else. So, going back to what you said, David, how do you know that a crop duster is not coming on the field and you're not going to hit it with those drones? Well, the one thing is, if a farmer is spraying the field, they know who's going to be spraying the field. They're going to hire either a drone or they're going to hire a crop duster, but they're probably not going to hire both of them. And if they do, they know that they're not going to be flying at the same time. So that's number one. How do you know that somebody next door is not crop dusting? That should not really affect the drone that's flying at 50 feet because of the low altitude operation for these agricultural operations. Then there should be almost never a risk where a crop duster is going to be in the same area as anybody else. If we add ADSB in, if we add electronic conspicuity on top of it, then it's a win-win. Then we can all share the airspace, all operate. You want to add something else? Let's put a NODAM in there. Let's put a NODAM 24 hours in advance that's going to tell the pilot, the man aircraft pilot, that there's going to be operation at 50 feet over this specific field. And then we're good. Then everybody should be looking for everybody. But we're proposing for let me just finish this one, Misha, so I don't forget. We're proposing that the right-of-way rules remain the same as what we have in Part 107, which is drones give way to manned aircraft, unlike what is being proposed right now in Part 108. In some situations, Part 108 drones would have priority. At low altitude, low risk, because we have visual observers, because we have DAA, because we have the technology, we can actually give way to other aircraft. That's all I want to say.
Okay, so the whole right of way thing is I want to address that later within the context of public safety, because I think that's also another gap.
Yes.
But coming back to the crop duster flying at 50 feet and knowing that it's either going to be a manned aircraft or it's going to be a drone, and that whoever owns that property is making those determinations. They're hiring them, they know who's going to be there. That deconfliction is pretty organic. However, there are farms out there with thousands and thousands of acres, and there are ag services that use drones to do multiple properties, the larger drones, right?
Mhm.
So it's plausible that we need to be flexible in our thinking. It's not always a one size fits all solution.
Mhm.
So in most cases, it's probably going to be very organic self separation. The whoever owns the property is going to know who's going to be out there and when. But when we have services servicing multiple farmers, for example, multiple properties, there does need to be some kind of situational awareness that's
Yes.
made available through all of the technologies that we just talked about, whether it's ground-based sense and avoid, or it's ADSB, or it's some other kind of EC, maybe something we don't know about yet,
Yep.
that allows us to have that situational awareness. Because bottom line is, if we don't have that situational awareness, that's where the dangers start. The risk gets higher.
Yep. I agree. Yeah. EC, some kind of conspicuous should be visible to everybody else in the airspace. I think that's not a big demand for the manned aircraft community, as long as we have more EC devices available. Right now, there is one. I don't know of any other one, but once we have that, then I think we solve a big piece of the puzzle.
And it's not that the federal folks who have been all working in this space don't recognize that. They had to do two things. They had to put out a forward-leaning rule, right? Something that is sustainable for the future. And then they also had to do something that is a little more pragmatic towards what we are able to do today that builds on what we were doing yesterday. So
Mhm.
there are folks in the federal environment who recognize that, yeah, this is not perfect, and they are working on how to introduce these nuances, whether it be amendments or a later rule, or they're going to, be pretty clear about what they expect from the waivers that come in, because they've got to prove the cases. So just don't think that this is a one and done, and the FAA is like, yeah, this is awesome and I'm done with you. That's not the case at all.
Mhm. That's
Yep.
good stuff. So quick shout out to Daniel Fuller, one of my friends. Just saw him at CUAV as well, and he represents a company that applies that autonomy you were referring to, Michelle, where they can do this one to many, and they'll like learn from a pilot, let's say in an agriculture example, for like the most efficient way to hit a field, and they'll use AI and then send out a whole fleet to mimic and do different things. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty cool. But again, that's like where things are going. But Greg, your point was for those operations that are more simple, that a Part 107 license holder that's using, a visual observer that's right there with their drone at that field, they should still be able to operate within that safety realm, while we also make way for that future autonomous program, right? That obviously would
Well,
need more going on than the individual
the
pilot.
three the three types of operations that we divided this into are all operations that exist today with waivers. So all the things that we took, we didn't actually make anything up. We just said, hey, you have a waiver. How do you do it? You have a waiver. How do you do it? And then we're basically trying to standardize this into saying, okay, if you meet these requirements, then you should be able to get, the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight without a waiver. So, the last category, by the way, is shielded operations. And we looked at historical data. We looked at the ARC had made a recommendation with 100 feet. We looked at New Zealand is doing 100 meters, which is 300 and some feet. And we decided we're asking for 200 feet. I think it's a little high, but if any.
I think we lost your audio, Greg. Say that again. What was a little high, Greg?
New Zealand. New Zealand was 327 feet, I think. So it's 100 meters. So we went kind of in between what the ARC and the and New Zealand is proposing, and we're proposing 200 feet for shielded operations. But in shielded operations, it's very much the same concept. You have a DSBN, so you are aware of everybody else that's flying around, and then the distance, by the way, the maximum distance is based on the C2 link data. So if your C2 link can go further, then you can go further. That's based on what the manufacturer says the C2 link is good for, and again, we're trying to keep it simple. We're trying to use things that already exist. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just putting it all in one proposal so that, by the way, this can live as either a subpart of Part 108. It can be a subpart of Part 107, or it can actually be its own subpart, its own part, like Part 109, which would be low risk, non-autonomous BVLOS flights compared to fully autonomous BVLOS flights in Part 108.
That's great. Victor Ellis said, how do we enforce electronic conspicuity? This summer, he had 2 near misses with his ag drone and helos transitioning, less than 100 feet across fields. He was spraying, was monitoring ADS-B on flight aware, still had no idea they were in the area until they were directly overhead.
Yep. And that's the difficulty. That's where I think we need to have the drones avoid the manned aircraft. I've had this discussion with the group that we brainstormed for the last couple of weeks. I fly aircraft. I know how difficult it is at low altitude to look for traffic, to look for even an aircraft itself. Looking for a bird, it's very difficult. You see it 1 second, you look for it, and then it's gone, especially when you're looking down into the terrain. When you're looking in the sky, it's a lot easier. Helicopter pilots, crop dusters, they're already not task saturated, but they have a high level of tasks as they're flying low, trying to avoid obstacles. We need to make sure it's on the drones to avoid manned aircraft and not the other way around. So I think in his case, that comment, if he was broadcasting ADS-B and the drone had ADS-B in, the drone should be avoiding the manned aircraft and getting out of the way.
And it sounded like the crop duster was not transmitting ADS-B because Victor was monitoring for that and nothing was there on flight aware.
So they were drone pilots. They were not they were, okay. I see. Yeah. So that's, again, this is EC, that's where we go. And so his question is, how do you enforce it? I guess, it's regulatory. You put it in a regulation and it's required when you're flying below 400 feet.
This is going to be a very, very difficult culture change for general
Yes.
aviation. So, we need to be sensitive to the fact that they have had this safety culture for many, many years. And now, we're introducing drones and it's causing some consternation in there. And things are going to need to change to some degree, and that's hard. Change is always hard.
Yep.
However, if we are open to listening to the general aviation community and understanding what might not be so arduous, is it ADS-B or is it some other way? Can they tap into ground-based sense and avoid and be able to share that situational awareness when they're operating VFR? Maybe that would be okay. We know that there are technologies that are coming out today that are very inconspicuous. They're very small. They slap them on the windshield and that's all they have to do. So we're getting there, but we need to be sensitive to the fact that we're like a bull in a china shop, this drone community. We're coming into an existing culture that is not used to how fast we move and the risks that we present.
Yep.
Well, so
And I
Greg,
can
what
answer
are
that.
yeah, go ahead.
I
Yeah, I just
yeah,
want to
I
hear you
get,
because you represent pilots too, aviation
yep.
pilots and drone pilots. I'm kind of just becoming aware of the fact that you're representing both parties. So I'm so curious, like, what are you actually hearing? But
Yeah.
what are standard, aviation pilots willing to do that you're hearing? Are they happy to jump on board with EC or the electronic conspicuity, or what do you? I'm so curious, and you can share
Mhm.
whatever you were going to share earlier. I just had to jump in and say
Yeah,
that.
no, it's Michelle, you hit it on the head. I think it's what is that community willing to do and willing to give up. So I had meetings with there were 11 groups of manned aircraft associations that put their heads together trying to go through this Part 108 thing, and I was invited to those meetings. The number one thing is they don't want to broadcast ADSB anywhere and everywhere, and there's a reason for this, is because ADSB sends a lot of personal private information about location, and it's tied to an N number. And what has been happening lately, which we have been opposing very heavily, is that airports are using this to send bills to pilots because they're in the airspace, which is a terrible, terrible idea. But it's happening. And so a lot of people now are afraid because when they don't need a DSB, they're not going to turn it on. But here's the solution. EC, electronic conspicuity, is not tied in to private data. It just says that there is an aircraft right here that is flying in the airspace, which is all that we need for traffic separation. We don't care if it's Billy Bob or if it's somebody else that's flying. We just need to know that there is an aircraft there. And so what they're going to be pushing for is for these EC devices to become more available, because again, it's not a full installation on an aircraft that is very expensive. Installing NDSB on an aircraft that doesn't have it right now is expensive. So a device that's going to be more affordable and turn on, battery powered, you put it on the windshield, not visible to everybody else. So that's what they're pushing for. I can tell you that already. I've seen the draft comment that they're pushing for, and I think it's a great solution. So EC is the solution.
Agreed.
Interesting. That's okay. Well, switching gears here, Usman sent in this question: how do we extend this proposal or proposed framework to 2+ mile operation? Alluding back to your comments, Greg, about
Waivers.
staying within that 2 mile as
Yep.
part of your proposal, right? There was like your option. Hey, if I'm only flying up to 2 miles, I could do A, B, or C, or whatever the case there. But what about those who come in and say, "Oh, I want to fly way much further"?
Yep. Two different ways. You can do it with a waiver under what we call the BVLOS rule. You can do it with DAA. So if you have DAA and it goes further than 2 miles, then you should be allowed to do this under BVLOS. Keeping, again, the waiver in mind, because like Michelle said, there are situations that we're not going to think about for the regulation. So that should be waivable. And then the other solution is to do it with shielded operation, because there's no limit there other than the C2 link controller.
And
Our
I
option.
think it's important to foot stop here that waivers are not bad things. Waivers in this specific case are enablers to bridge that gap.
Yep.
Now, we don't have all of the waiver opportunities identified quite yet, which I'm very happy, Greg, that you all are going to be providing that consideration for the FAA to work through. But the waivers are how we get to a futuristic state without having to have massive change. It's incremental. So it's how we push the envelope, it's how we get beyond 2 miles, but still within that safety bubble. We still have to have that structure. We can't just go off and do things, because remember, there are a lot of other folks that are flying in the NAS that have an expectation that our drone operators are going to respond and react in a certain way that they know that is predictable for them, that they expect, so that we are maintaining that safety culture. Because bottom line is, once you get up in the air, it's aviation, and that is as most folks know. I mean, and I'll go back to public safety. We have a large contingent of public safety in our audience typically, and they have had to kind of do the watermelon through garden hose treatment, learning aviation on top of their already very complicated mission sets that they have, whether they're search and rescue or law enforcement or firefighting.
Mhm.
Now they had to add this whole level of federal aviation regulations and that they didn't have before. It's up to us, those of us that are on this call, those of us that are listening to this call, to figure out how to make these transitions as easy as we can for these sectors
Yep.
where aviation is not necessarily their first language.
Yep. And by the way, our proposal totally includes public safety agencies because EV loss is what they've been doing. Unless you're talking about DFR, which is slightly different, but you're talking about EV loss. This is something that they've been doing and that they could be doing under this proposal by simply adding a beyond visual line of sight rating to their Part 107. All of them are Part 107 rated already.
Yes, I love that. And, we only have 15 minutes left. However, um, maybe this whole public safety conversation can be a part two, because I think there is a whole lot more that we could get into when it comes to public safety and beyond visual line of sight and right of way and adding a type rating. That could take more than 15 minutes that we have left.
Yep. Agreed.
And of course, the DFR programs now are mostly under Part 91 certificate of waiver. So and we'll deep dive that on Tuesday actually with
and they wouldn't need
coming
to
up
be.
here.
Yeah, they don't need to be. In this case, in our case, unless again you're doing DFR, which is kind of its own animal, you wouldn't need that. So
Sure. I guess we do work with quite a few folks who are doing DFR. It's becoming more and more prevalent because of the certificate of waiver under Part 91 that fairly recently was rolled out and streamlined. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of police agencies across the country immediately applied and are getting approvals, to fly DFR, BVLOS, and it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool new world. But that, anyway, again, a conversation for another podcast. But I think the right of way question is really fascinating for them. I think in terms of like, are delivery drones versus 911 emergency dispatch drone, in terms of who has priority there. I think that's like a whole conversation that's going to come up there.
Maybe you've
I think it's a
already
no-brainer.
covered this in your comments, Greg, but I'm curious about your thoughts on the public safety drone right-of-way confluence.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward for me. I mean, if you have a drone that's in a life-saving scenario, they should have priority over a drone delivering tube socks. I always use that example, somewhere. Unless it's a medical drone, then that's where I think a medical delivery drone and a public safety thing. But I think we can route these. And how often are we going to have these two drones in the same location at the same time conflicting? I think we can use. That's when UTM becomes kind of a great concept to oversee and supervise all of this. But over any other type of drone, a drone in public safety is saving a life, probably of an officer on the ground.
So let's think beyond that. Let's get bigger and more inclusive. And what about general aviation that's flying in the same vicinity, not involved in whatever that emergency is? Do they have to give right away to the public safety drone?
So the difficulty when we talk about right of way with manned aircraft is that they.
Nope. Greg, lost
Sorry.
your audio. Go ahead. Say it one more time.
Am I back? Am I back?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. The difficulty with the manned aircraft community is that there has to be they would have to be told somehow that something has priority over another one, unless it's codified ahead of time. Historically, as you know, Michelle, the way that it's worked is that we have a hierarchy of devices that have priority over others. Balloons are not really easy to maneuver, so they have the highest priority, and then it goes down from here. So if you tell me as a manned aircraft pilot and say, hey, you have to give way to this delivery drone or this drone right here because it's a public safety drone. My question is going to be, how do I know? How do I know that this thing is here in the first place and that it has priority? And we have to keep in mind, if we're flying at low altitude, pilots are task saturated. They have a lot that is going on. Asking them to look at a screen to see if there is a drone in there and avoid it is very, very difficult. And it adds to their workload. So, that's a tough one. I have a very hard time.
It is.
and I sit on the balance right between the drone side and the airplane side, and the manned aircraft and the unmanned aircraft community. How do I have a hard time finding a situation where a drone needs to give way to a manned aircraft? That is very
The
difficult
other way around, right? Where the
a
manned
dro-
aircraft needs to give way
manned
to the
aircraft has,
drone.
yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So let me paint a scenario for you. So let's say general aviation pilot out flying for the love of aviation, VFR didn't file a VFR flight plan and is just enjoying the day. We are in an age of EC, so he's got a little gadget that's stuck to his windshield that provides situational awareness to a low altitude monitoring system, surveillance system, traffic management system, whatever you want to call it, that is
Mhm,
shared by any other entity operating in the air in that vicinity.
mhm,
So now we have shared situational awareness, and there is a fire that comes up, and I expect that there's probably going to be a general aviation manned aircraft version of well clear where the response time needs to be considered before they have to pull up and avoid.
mhm.
That's probably not going to be the case, but perhaps it's more about avoiding the region, avoiding that area, and having enough alert, predictability of the system, having enough time to react to,
Mhm.
okay, there is a law enforcement thing going on, or something else, and they're using their drones, and I'm at 500 feet right now because I'm taking photos or whatever. I'm going to now get an alert from my thing stuck to the windshield that tells
Yep,
me I need to go north a little bit to avoid that area. That in
yep,
my mind is practical.
yep.
That makes sense, and it doesn't uh, overburden the general aviation pilot, and it still gives right of way in some sense
Yep.
to that public safety event that is ongoing on the ground.
Yep.
The trouble is we keep talking about these things in literal black and white. It has to be this or that. And I don't think we're ever going to see a future like that again. Everything is going to be and, not or. So
Yep.
how do we
It,
talk about this as a confluence of all the things and then work out all those situations?
right.
That's the
I
difficult
think
part.
Oh, lost you,
Oh, we
Greg.
we
lost
all,
you.
Go for it.
damn. Okay, there you go. I think we
You
all
got
need to be
that.
at the table. Yeah, we all need to be at the table with all the communities need to be at the table and agree that in the future we're all going to have to be sharing that airspace at low altitude, and everybody has to agree that they have to be conspicuous. And what you're saying, Michelle, I think makes a lot of sense. And if you look at the NASA concept of Operation 2.0, this is some of the things that they've mentioned. You have a volume of airspace that would be reserved for emergencies. Now they don't call it a TFR, but I would call it a TFR. This is a pop-up TFR that comes up on the screen. What we don't have at the moment is a way to give that data to the pilot unless they're in controlled airspace and the controller says, hey, Cessna, blah, 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 avoid this area, or helicopter, blah, 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 head north. There's a TFR or something going on over there. And I think that's kind of the gap that we need to bridge right now. If it happens in uncontrolled airspace, then the chance of an airplane, well, no, I shouldn't say that. That's not true. If it happens in uncontrolled airspace, it becomes more difficult to send that data. But this could also be, I don't know if we can utilize ADSB technology to send a message to the pilot to tell them that there is something that is happening right there. But as far as seeing, we talk about what's in the proposal.
Oh, Greg, hang tight.
Damn it.
And
Okay.
you're back. What's in the proposal? We
Okay.
talk about what's in the proposal.
Yeah, what's in the proposal for Part 108 is that delivery drones would be about 110 pounds max. The big drones, 1,320 pounds, is only is only agricultural drones. For me, I have a difficult time thinking about how I would detect and see a 110-pound drone on the horizon to avoid them.
Yeah. So this is where the evolution of thinking is necessary for electronic conspicuity. Is
Yep.
it only to provide digital situational awareness? Does there need to be an alerting mechanism that is meaningful to that type of operator? So in the case of a GA pilot, you've got an EC device stuck on the windshield. Does it start flashing? Is there an
Potentially.
audible? You're right. And you know exactly what that means. That my current heading, I am now at risk. I need to move. And they can either talk to, perhaps it's a ADSP, whatever we're calling the new data service providers, that for drones, or it's the local facility. Even though he's flying VFR, they still are able to give alerts, and they're still able to provide services upon request.
Mhm.
So, if they have that screen in the tower and they know, or not, probably not in the tower, but maybe in the Tracon, and they know that, there's going to be some drone activity, they've got that screen, they see the polygon, that's an alert that they can share.
Yep. And again, we're talking about low altitude operations. So this is mostly going to affect helicopters. Airplane are not going to be doing this. An airplane moves fast. A helicopter moves quite slower, and they are more maneuverable as well than an airplane would be. But yeah, the helicopter is what we have to worry about. But also we have to worry about balloons, and we have to worry about gliders and paramotors and all of that, because they're the ones, in a way, the balloons, I think, are the ones that are the most at risk right now with this proposal, because they don't have maneuverability whatsoever, and they don't have conspicuity. And until recently, they did not have a way to be conspicuous to other people. And so again, it goes back to, we need to democratize these EC devices. There's got to be 100 of them available, and they have to be $200, and then we'll see a big change, I think, in visibility in the airspace.
Here,
in fact, someone said Aaron Nelson said, did you say the proposed did you say proposed builds of EC models, electronic conspicuity models, are about a few $100s and do not need a full aircraft installed? So I would gladly donate to a fund to supply these to manned aircraft to improve drone operations. There you go.
Right now, we're being told is that they're less than $1,000, so they're not a few hundred just yet. They need to be a few hundred, just like remote ID modules never should have been $80 or $100. They should have been $20, like they are today. As far as
hold on, Greg.
Hold on.
Say it again. Second sentence. Go for it.
Bad connection in the world, and I don't know. Am I back?
Yep, you're back. You're good.
Okay.
As far as
when I lost my train of thought,
they should have been a few $100, or should get down to that.
Yeah. The remote ID modules, the FAA subsidized for a while ADSB installations on manned aircraft for a few years. When I managed flight schools, we had the ability to do that. So why not have a way to subsidize this? If these devices are less than $1,000, how much money do we need to equip everybody who doesn't have an electrical system with EC? Probably.
So let's
wait,
we
Michelle,
have 2 more minutes
yeah,
left.
I was going to say,
let me just say something real quick, David.
I want to pull something up.
This is not necessarily just a federal responsibility. This could be initiatives at the state level. I just want to plant that seed.
That's good. And I hate to interrupt our flow, but I just want to say again, thanks for listening, everybody, on 9/11. We never want to forget what happened. The land of the free because of the brave. I showed this at the beginning, but there's probably other folks on here. So we appreciate you guys tuning in today, and we just want to remember this. And also, if you want to join the flight crew, Andrew Bowen, thank you so much. Michelle Duquette, thank you so much for just shouting out about the episode today. You guys are amazing. Wouldn't happen without you. If anyone out there wants to be on the flight crew, let me know. Give me a shout. But otherwise, we got couple of minutes left here. Just want to pull those up real quick, for those folks who have joined since we started. But did you get your thought in, Michelle, or did you want to pick up any more comments on that? You were just saying it could be a state level as opposed to necessarily a federally level funded initiative.
We can't keep dumping everything on the FAA. They just don't have the capacity. And these are not things that they have to be responsible for. We know that our current administration is distributing more decision making and more budget allocations down to the state levels. There is every reason that the states could be initiating some of these things themselves with state level plans.
Brilliant. Well, if we have another minute left here, Andrew Bowen, ask this, and it kind of leads into really, I think, where Part 108 is meant to help enable, right? Which is, what about these drone in the box, box drones with no pilots on site? And obviously then that would be more of like an automated scenario. I'm sure you can fly some of those shielded, and you could probably stay within some of the rules that you mentioned earlier. But I would think, and we don't have time to really dive into it, but I guess any comments on, how Part 108 either currently written or could be written to enable drone in the box?
Yep, our proposal actually covers that. So it's it would be able to operate under one of the three categories that we mentioned, and because they're operating by now with waivers that are issued by the FAA under Part 107. So our proposal covers that. So the fact that there's still a pilot in the loop, they're just not on site, and we didn't really restrict our proposal to the pilot being on site.
Wonderful.
Beautiful. There was a question about cybersecurity for OEMs, but I don't think we necessarily. You guys have opinions about that? Part 108 requiring anything on cybersecurity?
We don't have time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the requirement that we put in ours is very simple. It's based on the operation. If you have a network system, then there should be scalable policies that you follow, and it should all scale depending on the complexity of your network.
Okay, and that was Ben Grossman. Thank you so much, Ben, for asking that question. With that, we are out of time. Man, that was a quick hour. That was surprising. So thanks.
Good conversation.
Thanks both you guys, Michelle, Greg, and guys, go check out the Pilot Institute. I'm sure you're all well familiar with it, but Greg's got an amazing YouTube channel as well as the Institute itself. Hundreds of thousands of followers and people engaging in his content. So, please go over there, check him out, follow him. And big thanks, Greg, for coming to our lowly podcast and elevating our knowledge today. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Monday, we'll have a video actually with the full proposal. I recorded it yesterday. So if you go on the YouTube channel on Monday, it's probably going to be 35 minutes explanation of everything we're proposing. And then there'll be a document you can download to see the details of what we're proposing. So
do you have a link to that currently that we can share?
No.
Okay.
It's getting edited right now, but it's on a YouTube channel. So if you go on Pilot Institute, on youtube.com, Pilot Institute, make sure you're on the drone channel. We have an airplane channel as well, but on the drone channel, it'll be there.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we'll wrap up today. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.